And her co-author is Maja Žumer. Tanja Mercun is Assistant Professor of Information Science, and Maja Žumer is Professor of Information Science at the Department of Library and Information Science and Book Studies, University of Ljubljana, Slovenia. They are part of a research group in which the primary focus is directed at modeling and investigating bibliographic information systems, usability, user needs, and user experience. An important part of the research is also devoted to FRBR family of models. Tanja?
Okay, thank you. So this talk is going to focus more about, well, what do we want our catalogs to be, and how do we get there, and how do we keep in mind the user, and how do we serve the user. So this is going to be sort of a discussion on where we want to go. And we have heard a bit about it, but I'll just try to continue with this thought. So in the last few years, we have witnessed several initiatives that have actually triggered a long overview discussion on bibliographic data and records, and really just present an opportunity to set up a framework and an infrastructure that could enable more powerful retrieval and semantics, create more functional, informative, and useful, technologically advanced catalogs, and last but not least, better meet users' needs. That's what catalogs are all about. But this transition will not really happen overnight, and that is why it is important to understand the limitations and the potentials of current format, cataloging rules and practices in correlation to the desired catalog functionality. And I fear that there is a danger that the transformation will not be successful if we don't base our action on the objectives of the library catalog and the vision of users' interaction. Well, we have heard something about catalog objectives already, and they have been shaped through our history, and basically just tell us that on the one hand, the library catalog should help a user find a known item, but there's a whole other section. It should also give a user an overview of the library collection and support exploration and selection of not only different editions of a work, but also works by an author on a certain topic and within a certain type of literature. And it seems quite straightforward, but we know that right now our catalogs are really quite good at supporting the first objective, but not really that good at supporting the second one. And maybe we should even go a bit further and look at a bigger picture and ask questions like, well, how well does our catalog answers user questions, and what questions should a library catalog be able to answer? Maybe that's a really bigger, even bigger one. And what kind of information seeking behavior should it support? Because I think that with the declining use and importance of library catalogs, we really need to create a vision of what we want the library catalog to be, what its added value, and how it will differentiate itself from other information providers. And I think that a good way of assessing our catalogs is by asking typical user questions, and this is something that Cutter did in when he created his rules for printed catalog. He actually looked at what user questions he's faced with and how to solve them. And let's just look at some of these questions, and we'll try to think about how does your library catalog really answers them. So what works by Charles Dickens does the library hold? How easy it is to answer that question? I think it's sometimes a bit difficult because you have all these editions of different works, and it takes a while to get through all of them and just get a picture of, well, what works are actually there. Which is the most recent work and not edition by Haruki Murakami, or which works in the library collection have been performed by and which were composed by Vladimir Horowitz. or which English translations of Iliad can I choose from, or just borrowing Pinocchio, whose illustrations can I choose from, and what novels have been written based on Pride and Prejudice, or what adaptations were based on Don Quixote and are available in my library. So if we just stay with the Don Quixote example, well, we have so many different editions and versions within one library, and they can differentiate itself by not just by the year of publication, but also we have different editions in different languages, and even within one language we have different translations, okay. Some may be in the original, based on the original text, some may be revised, other may be abridged, some are more modern translations, some are a bit outdated. We can have different selections of text from Don Quixote. We can have even dual language editions. There are different illustrations and forewords that have accompanied Don Quixote. We can have it in a textual form or in form of spoken word. We can have different adaptations, comic books adaptations, and so on. So current library catalogs, well, doing a query, typical keyword query on Don Quixote Cervantes, we just get this list of results, and we can see here, well, 494 results. How do we get through all of them? How do we get an idea of what we can choose from, and how do we differentiate them from one another? And, well, even with the faceted navigation, we get a bit better sense of what is there and what is available, but still it's not that detailed, and we don't really get this a good picture of how things are related to each other. So the idea behind initiatives such as FRBR is that we want to get from this very linear list of results and additions, we call them manifestations in FRBR terminology, to more meaningful structures where we will be able to see that these editions actually belong to the same work, but they are differentiated based on some characteristics. We also want to see that, well, in the results list there are some editions that belong to different works, but are in some way or another connected to Cervantes' Don Quixote. Maybe we want to go further than that, and we want to see that Don Quixote has actually various adaptations in form of novel, motion picture, musical, picture book, play. There are some imitations of Don Quixote. It has been complemented with different illustrations and forewords, so we want to get an overview of that, or we want to just explore what kind of works have been written about Don Quixote. And if we move from this Don Quixote example, we are also interested in the author. So we want to know if an author has written other works. We want to know that, for example, one author has written novels, poems, plays, or fairy tales, or maybe this same person has been also a translator, not just an author, or he has been an illustrator or something. So just different roles that a person played are interesting to our users. And also, well, what has been written about that person. So this is just like a concept of what we want to, or I imagined we would want to achieve in our catalogs. So going back to the shortcomings of our catalogs, well, the thing is that we know that users are in a way frustrated by the functionality of the library catalog. But another thing is that they have also shaped their expectations based on existing systems. And I don't think that they even expect such questions, as we were discussing before, to be answered by a catalog. And right now the web and the Wikipedia are, unfortunately, the resource you have to turn to really get an answer of what books has, for example, Umberto Eco written. That's the resource. But the question is, isn't it the role of the library to provide answers to such questions. So going from this local to more global idea, as we heard in the keynote. And well, FRBR is a model that in its conception creates a framework that could enable users to get such answers. But the thing is that we have not really discussed how do we fully implement these concepts in a user interface. I think that's something that we sort of forgot about. In the 1990s, there were some discussions on work records and how they could be sort of displayed in user interfaces. But I think that the issue has been put aside in the last decade, and maybe because there has been such a divide between the ideas and the limitations of the bibliographic data. And well, as many researchers said, the solution to catalog displays lie actually in changing the cataloging practice. So that's what we want to do if we want to get to a better service in our catalogs. So I'd just like to share a few slides on our experiment. It's we call it a Furberry's prototype, and it's not the solution, but I think it shows that we have to imagine what we want our catalogs to look like and how we want them to function, what answers we want them to fulfill, and then going from that to our catalogs or bibliographic data and try to form our bibliographic data so that they will support such functionality. So our objective was based on FRBR, and it was, we set the task to bring together different versions and editions of a work, display relationships between a broader work family, and just provide a really good overview of what is available, the navigational infrastructure for exploration, and also information needed to distinguish between individual entities and relationships. So this was our framework. And we used existing Mark 21 records, and then we iteratively worked between that, Furberization algorithms, going to the user interface, looking at what was working, what wasn't working, going back to editing our records and just doing this leap over and over again. And well, this is what our final prototype looked like. And we actually, this is just a part of what will have to be sort of done, but it was just how do we display a work record and how do we enable exploration within that work record. And we decided to test information visualization approach. It's something that we can do, but we could also do something else. And so this was actually the main display, was this overview and navigational tool that a user could really see what was going on. And there were 3 different displays, so different versions of, this is an example of Don Quixote, related works, and works by and about the author. And clicking on this interactive visualization, the user would then, on the right-hand side, get the list of results. So I would just like to focus on these 3 different tabs and what we had to do together. Keep in mind that we were working with Mark 21 records because, well, we know that things are going to move towards linked data, but in the end, we'll also have a pool of legacy data that we'll have to work on, and that is why it is important to understand how do we work with those records, how will we be able to transform them. So we just set up a schema and decided to go further, and not just this work expression manifestation, but create actually categories. First, by language, then by content type, different version, which is this expression level, and then in the end manifestation. So the user would see that Don Quixote is available in different languages. In Slovenian language, it's only in the textual form, and here we can see that we have 3 different abridged editions and 1 full translation. And selecting one of these versions, the user would then get a list of editions. And well, going to bibliographic data, we really had to manually do a lot of things because we wanted perfect Furberization results, because we wanted to imagine if we had this kind of data, what would we do with them? So we really needed to establish author-relator codes, preferred titles, original language, formal work and genre to identify the work. And some of these things were already there, but many of them were not, or they were really inconsistently there. So for the identifying the expression, we needed to add language of expression. We used content type and a contributor-relator code to really distinguish them. And in the methodization level, we added carrier type and media type, and we really needed to use linked fields, linking fields, because when there was several expressions or works within one manifestation, that was the only way that we could connect. Okay, these attributes and these agents are related to this entity, and others are related to another entity. So this is something that we were struggling at first, but then sort of found a solution in using that. And for the related work, so creating these work-to-work relationships, we decided to create another hierarchical kind of display, grouping the works by the relationship types. And we really just used very general relationship types. So here you can see for Don Quixote, the user can choose between adaptations, augmentations, and works about Don Quixote. But then we created another level in which these works were grouped by the formal work. So the user could see that from Don Quixote there are plays, musicals, motion pictures, graphic novels, and so on to choose from. And to do this, we really just needed to establish analytical authorized access points using relationship designator, creator, preferred title, and formal work. And we needed to make sure that the subject entries were there. And for the works by and about the author, we had a similar approach, but here we grouped everything by two relationship types, about the author and by the author. Within the about the author, we just used the formal work. So there are biographies, forwards, literary criticism, novel, and reference work about the author. And by the author, we used another level, just using these relationship designators to see, okay, this person has been the author of these works, but has also been a translator of other works, and so on. So again, we needed a clear identification of works and consistent use of relator codes. And just doing this, you can see that how important it is to have all the elements in our records, because as soon as one of those is missing, it's impossible to do this. And well, our experiment showed that we needed a substantial amount of editing, and it was not really easy to transform current records to achieve this desired presentation due to the missing and inconsistent data. And well, we tried to, when we were doing this, RDA was still in discussion, but we used some of the new Mark 21 records and fields, and we used the ideas expressed in the RDA, but we saw that, well, it's not really good enough to just say, well, do this if you feel it's okay, but just you need to do this if you want to create this kind of functionality. It's not an option. And we should really create vocabularies with the final input in mind, I think, because then it's so difficult to go from what we have in the records to what we want our catalogs to look like. And well, I'll just go to this because I have not so much time anymore, but just going from the objectives, what kind of questions need to be answered, and what should be offered to match or surpass other information sources. So this is our starting point. Then we should get to the interface. So how should the interface look like? What kind of functions and interactions should be supported? And then in the end, we have to think about, well, what data is needed to do this, and how should this data be encoded? And there are also more specific questions that we could ask. How will the function and data depend on the type of material? How should entities be clustered? So this is just one approach, but we can imagine some others. I think that whatever we do, I found it really great when I was reading the rules. Well, all the best catalogs have to, the best catalog answers the most questions with the least amount of trouble to the asker. So I think that's a good thing that we can start off with, just saying, okay, the user is what we're doing this for, and that's why we should follow this advice. Okay, thank you.